if you can listen to an album from start to finish and it just takes you away to a different place, that's real music for me. That's very impactful music. And I wanted to do that with Atone to a degree.
I think we all happen to be fans of similar kinds of music. And that's basically been the common thread, and that's what makes this project really work. In addition to, of course, us being very open-minded and very curious to explore new sounds, things that we haven't done before.
There's a lot of storytelling going on, and there are different instrumental elements and progressive elements to that whole record, and I really do think we've done a great job at being able to also take people on a journey with that. I remember being 8 years old and I had a Casio keyboard. It was the first instrument that I ever learned to play very badly. But what I used to do is, from a young age, is just sit in my room and just create chords with a synth and just circle different chords and then just sing over the top of them. And there'd be times when I'd just be there holding a chord for like 3 or 4 minutes, just kind of like really vibing out. And this is from like a really young age. I was finding that I had a connection to music and I was exploring. I remember my dad used to sit in his bedroom and just listen to me, and he would like come in and say, "Oh, play that again, that's really good." And it was a nice feeling to have a bit of validation that you were perhaps creating something that was acceptable. And I think that's when it all first started, actually. As the years went by, I started to become a singer, got involved in different projects. And it would be about 2010 when I joined TesseracT, which was a professional gig. I found that I had a lot of spare time on my hands, and at this point I started to dabble with music production software. I suddenly realised that I could program synth sounds via MIDI. Obviously I was a novice at this point, but I started to do the exact same thing I did when I was 8 years old, where I sustain certain chords and move notes around and create different patterns. That's how some of the very early White Moth songs were formed. It was a creative outlet, a way of me exploring new sounds and I guess moving away from metal and trying something very different with ambient music. It was a challenge for me to not only create my own music, but to project manage the whole thing myself. But I felt like the music needed more. It needed more body and more soul, and it needed someone who was a lot more professional in terms of production to get involved. And at that time, I was working with a friend of mine called Keshav Dhar.
I think it was the October of 2010, which was when I first received a message online from Dan on MySpace, back when that was actually a thing.
I really liked what he was doing and I started to guest on some of his work. Long story short, we created a band called Skyharbor, which was predominantly me and him to begin with, but we brought in another bassist, a guitarist and a drummer and started to take it on the road. So I developed a really good relationship with Keshav over the years. We became very good friends and he knew that I was doing White Moth and I asked him to get involved.
I actually joined White Moth for starters as a producer. Dan wasn't looking for anything more than that. He had a bunch of ideas that he'd been messing around with on Pro Tools. All he really needed at that point was for someone to step in and polish those ideas of his into a more presentable standard in terms of, sonics and that kind of stuff.
It just went from there really. It kind of suddenly blossomed into something much bigger and better.
The first track that he sent me to work on was The World Won't Sleep. And I remember lining up those stems and playing it for the first time, having no idea what I was about to hear, and all I'd heard from Dan up until this point was TesseracT and his ideas for Skyharbor. When I heard this, I was like, where has this music been my whole life? It was so unexpected. He just kept sending me ideas after ideas after ideas, and we just worked so well.
Not only that, but I started to work with another vocalist who had the most angelic voice. We actually met at a local church called Arena in Ilkeston. The more I heard her sing, the more I wanted to get her involved in the project.
I went along to his studio and initially was quite daunted by the whole process because I've never been in a recording environment like that before.
She'd never been in a project before. She just sang for her own enjoyment. I asked her to guest on a few tracks.
He gave me a lot of creative freedom to actually be able to write a lot of the lyrics and melodies myself.
I just said, you know what, take the track, it's yours. Let's just have you do a solo feature on it. And it went down a storm. You know, fans reacted to it really positively, like, I want to hear more of Jordan sing.
We ended up working together and coming up with a handful of songs that I'm really proud of.
The moment we were done with that album, it was not should we, it was like we have to get her involved, like in a way bigger capacity.
And she jumped at the chance, and now she's a full member of White Moth. We released the first album ourselves. It was a DIY approach.
We were talking tentatively about, what the next White Moth album could sound like. This is around 2013, after 1000 Wings was done and shelved, and we were like, okay, what's next? We thought, there's something missing here, There's an element that we haven't really explored, and that's that orchestral element.
And at that point, I became friends with another producer called Randy Slaugh, who's from Salt Lake City, producer in his own right, and he actually did some work on one of the Skyharbor albums we did.
The song Patience was, I think, our first collaboration where he, contributed strings and orchestral elements.
And we very quickly realised that Randy was a very talented producer and asked him to get involved in White Moth.
We hit up Randy asking if he'd be down to actually be a part of the project.
I got an email from Keshav. He and Dan hit me up wanting to see if I'd be interested in working with them on their side project. Initially I thought they just wanted some strings on a couple songs, but we started talking, one thing led to another, and somehow it evolved into me being brought in as another songwriter and member of the project.
Randy has some great connections at local universities, ensemble halls and studios where he did a lot of work himself as a producer. So he was able to very quickly propose the idea of real instrumentation, and so we absolutely jumped at the chance, and before we knew it, Randy was sending some amazing ideas. It was slightly overwhelming to all of a sudden consider that we could really take this in a very new direction organically.
He's so critical to the project now that I literally cannot see it functioning without him.
Cool. Nice, let's do a few more takes. Okay, here we go. we started to look at who was going to do drums on the album, I reached out to a really good friend of mine named Mac Christensen, someone I've known for years and collaborated with on a lot of projects.
So we've got Mac Christensen, who's White Moth's drummer now.
It had always been a question in the air of, well, is it going to be a need for organic drums, or is it going to be programmed? And it just kind of came out at the last minute. I had a hookup at a local studio, and it was just like, well, hey, send me the parts, I'll learn them up, and let's get them going. It was later that week, went to the studio. By the time I had sent the tracks back to Keshav, it was going in to be mixed, and you guys were sending it off to Kscope. So it's like...
So just start there and it'll be alright?
Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay. Give me some time to think about my line.
It was crazy just how much it changed the game. There's just nothing like a real performance.
I'm always very careful and very selective over who I work with. That's just born out of negative experiences in the past and being a wiser individual. I want to work with like-minded people, with people that are really enthusiastic and committed and will go the extra distance because they love the project.
We have a really strong lineup for the project now. Amazing songwriters producing some beautiful music for us to sing over.
I think now we're really settled. We've got a strong lineup. We all get on really well, and I think that's good for the dynamics of the whole project. So with TesseracT, the way that we write is very different. Similar in some ways because there's a lot of file sharing. We don't often get in the same room. But in the past, I've just been presented with instrumentals. So I've always had to mould myself into whatever music I've been presented. White Moth is very, very different because I'm working with producers and not just with producers, but also in a very relaxed atmosphere where we can experiment with keys. We can really go to town on developing the right sound palette. Experiment with the individual sounds and, picking and choosing which ones work for the direction we want to go in.
What do you think about trying this out? What do you think about trying that approach out? What do you think about this or that? And more often than not, it's surprising just how much on the same page we are.
We'll write each other's parts, and I might write a verse that would suit Dan's voice better, so he might sing that, or I'll sing one of his really hooky choruses, and that works really well together.
Another really interesting element to this whole process is that we are based worldwide.
We definitely have a very unique blend of styles that I don't think we'd have if we were all from the same hometown. We all have access to different resources, different studios, different musicians.
1000 Wings was almost entirely done in the box, whereas with Atone, the proportion of live to programmed was way different. Like, there was so much more live stuff. 1000
Wings was such a successful album that we were able to invest into this album to have real instrumentation throughout the whole thing. So we have real piano, we have real harp, real strings, even real choir, and it's just such a beautiful sound that it's added to the album.
There were so many things that were fully live and even captured that way or even ideated that way. Like the pipa, for example, on the Sage. That sort of thing would not have made its way into 1000 Wings.
There were a few moments on the album, the Sage being one of them, where we wanted a little extra authenticity in the instrumentation. I have a connection with a producer over in Taiwan, and I demoed out and notated a general outline for the idea I had, sent it over to the studio there, and essentially gave them instructions to pretty much do their own interpretation with my idea. And the end result was incredible.
会早一点，还好。
even though we incorporated, you know, string players and harpists and all these different amazing musicians, at the heart of it all, it's still a DIY album.
The process is very similar to what I'm already used to with Skyharbor, which is everyone in the band has their own little recording setup. You know, without that, it would be impossible. There's just no way that it would work. As and when anyone gets an idea, it's as simple as that. You record it really quickly, bounce it, upload it into the Dropbox. Within seconds, everyone has access to it. Everyone can download it, import it into their stations, lay their ideas over it, and we communicate over chat, you know, with WhatsApp.
Long distance telephone calls and Skype calls and WhatsApp calls. Cool, I'll see you guys next week then, yeah?
Yeah.
See you later.
Sounds good.
Bye.
Peace.
The only obvious con that exists is the fact that we would be so much more efficient if we were all together.
We'd all been working separately on these songs.
It's definitely tough not being able to jam in the same room.
Trying to get everyone on the same level at the same time was obviously quite difficult at times.
We had band members all across the world.
Keshav and I are 12.5 hours different. If we're trying to set up a group call, there's really only a handful of hours we can even overlap with everyone.
I probably look terrible right now because it's like 3 in the morning.
When someone has free time, there's a good chance that the other person or one of the other members doesn't. You know, so we're kind of left often to our own devices, and we're like, okay, well, you know, you do what you can on your own, but you sort of have to wait for the stars to align and everyone's schedules to sort of, you know, come together where you can actually have a period of time where you concentrate on White Moth.
But when it did work, it was great, you know, and that's the beauty of having things like Facebook and WhatsApp and Skype is, even though you might not be online at the same time, you can file share, you can leave messages and you can have conversations, even though they're quite sporadic. Being in a group together, you can see when people are reading messages, so you can kind of give them a nudge if they haven't replied to you in a day or two and say, come on, what's going on, where are you? Are you awake?
There have been moments when we've been able to write music in person, or, you know, at least discuss ideas in person. And there have been very, very few and far between.
Yeah.
Is it too big? Like,
It's not too big actually. I'm not quite sure on some of the chord changes.
Okay.
But the idea is great.
Cool.
So really
And we can go over that. Honestly, like, I just wanted to kind of show you this stuff now. We can go over it after you get back from tour.
Yeah.
Maybe this one I'll hold off on tracking with real strings just till we get the parts all configured.
Yeah.
But I want to do this with like real choir, like real.
Oh man.
I get students that say, you know, I'm finding it really hard to find, you know, like-minded musicians in my local town to form a band, and our people are still getting into a room to jam ideas, and they talk about how difficult it is to kind of like spend your time wisely in that 3-hour time you've got in the practice room together. People are tinkering around and just doing their own thing. There's no cohesive, you know, gelling of riffs, and that can take a long time to write. In that scenario, it really is like too many cooks spoiling the broth for me. But like in your own zone, in your own comfort zone, you know, in your own time, I find it's a much quicker way of writing music than being in a room together.
All things considered, I think we've done really well. I think Steph Carpenter from the Deftones really put this in a way that I couldn't express better myself. You know, he said, success is in the act of doing it, whatever it is. You know, you do something with conviction, with love, with intent, and with the intent of making whatever it is you're making the best it could possibly be.
The success of this project is the fact that I had a vision and a creative outlet that grew and blossomed into something fantastic. So much so that it created a worldwide following.
The music is just incredible. Turn your radio up. White Moth, Black Butterfly.
A record label like Kscope have heard what we've produced and seen our work ethic and decided to get involved. That is actually unheard of in a lot of respects, to have a studio project with the backing of the music industry. They can see the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan of where this could go, and that excites me.
I don't see us ever doing the same type of record twice, you know what I'm saying? Like Atone was awesome, 1000 Wings was awesome, but I really feel like there's so much ground we could cover on the next record.
And I guarantee that White Moth will be around for a long, long time. It's very exciting to think where it's going to go in the future.
Jordan is frozen.
Guys, so if I'm not doing.
It just blipped.
I'm sorry.
Just cut out.
Whatever Jordan said was completely incomprehensible. It was absolutely